The man on the auction block is a preacher, his voice not lifted in praise, but warped into a carnival barker's rasp. He gestures to the woman beside him, his hand hovering near her swollen belly, as if presenting a prize sow. "A fine specimen," he booms, his words bouncing off the dusty facades of Redemption Creek's main street. "Sturdy stock, good for parts and labor. Strong back for field work, nimble fingers for mending, and comes with a bonus. Gentlemen, a babe in the belly, free of charge to the winning bidder." A wave of coarse laughter ripples through the grimy assembly of farmers and prospectors. The woman, Elara, flinches. Her face is pale, smudged with the dust of a long and bitter journey, but her chin is held at an angle of defiance that seems to cost her every ounce of strength. Her hands are not idle. They are locked around a worn leather-bound sketchbook, holding it to her chest like a shield. It is the only thing in this world that is truly hers. Silas Croft, the man who is to be her father-in-law, stands by the edge of the makeshift stage, a wagon bed, with his arms crossed. His face is a mask of pious grievance. He'd paid her passage from the east, expecting a bride for his feckless son, Jedediah. When she arrived, showing the gentle swell of early pregnancy, a life begun and lost before she ever left home, he'd declared the deal void. But Silas Croft was not a man to suffer a loss. He was recouping his investment. At the very back of the crowd, away from the stench of cheap whiskey and unwashed bodies, Alastair Finch watches in disbelief. He is a man of sharp lines and clean linen, a stark silhouette of wealth and order against the town's chaotic squalor. He is here to survey the path for his railroad, a titan of industry accustomed to bending landscapes and politicians to his will. This is something else. A crude, human cruelty he thought belonged to a darker age. It offends his sense of order, his belief in progress. He is about to turn away, to erase the ugly spectacle from his mind, when a sudden gust of wind whips through the street. It catches the corner of the woman's sketchbook. The cover flips open, and a single page is exposed for a brief, startling moment. Alastair's breath catches. Amidst the filth and degradation, he sees it, a breathtakingly detailed sketch of a desert mariposa lily, its delicate petals rendered with a hand so fine, so full of life, it feels as if he could pluck it from the page. It is a tiny, perfect piece of beauty in a world of profound ugliness. The bidding has stalled at $15. The preacher, now acting as auctioneer, looks to Silas Croft, who gives a curt, disgusted nod. $15, going once, going twice. Alastair sees the woman, Elara, close her eyes. Her knuckles are white on the cover of her book. He sees not a specimen, not parts and labor, but the artist who captured the soul of a flower. The crushing of that spirit feels more barbaric than any crime he can name. As the auctioneer's hand begins its final descent, a voice, clear and cold as mountain spring water, cuts through the humid air. $1,000. Every head in the crowd swivels. The sun glints off the silver at Alastair Finch's collar. He has just entered the bidding, not for a woman's labor, but for the soul he saw in her art. There's more to this character than meets the eye. Before their true worth or secret comes to light, tell us, have you ever misjudged someone only to be surprised? And if you love a story of hidden depths, hit like and subscribe. The sum was so astronomical, so utterly alien to the economy of Redemption Creek, that it produced a stunned, reverent silence. $1,000 could buy a man a respectable plot of land, a small herd of cattle, a start. To spend it on a disgraced, pregnant woman was an act of madness or unimaginable wealth. Alastair Finch possessed the latter, and the town was now certain of the former. Silas Croft's jaw, which had been set in a grim line of satisfaction, dropped. His beady eyes widened. Darting from the crisp banknote Alastair's man was already holding to Alastair's impassive face. Greed warred with suspicion and, for a fleeting moment, won. He scurried forward, his earlier piety vanishing like a morning mist. "Sold," Croft yelped, before the preacher could even process the bid. Sold to the gentleman in the back. The transaction was executed with the chilling efficiency of a corporate merger. Alistair did not deign to approach the wagon bed himself. His aide, a quiet man named Thomas, stepped forward, counted out the gold eagles into Croft's trembling, eager hands, and procured a hastily scribbled bill of sale. It was a grotesque document, listing Alara by her first name only, described as chattel, her condition noted as a defect that had been factored into the final exorbitant price. Alistair took the paper without looking at it and tucked it into his breast pocket, the crinkle of the paper a sickening sound in the sudden quiet. He then walked forward, his polished boots silent in the thick dust. The crowd parted for him, their earlier jeers replaced by awestruck murmurs. They were flies, and he was a hawk swooping through their midst. He stopped before the wagon, his gaze lifting to meet Alara's. Her eyes were wide with a terror that was different now. Before, it had been the fear of the known, of leering farmers and a life of brutal servitude. Now, it was the fear of the unknown. This man, with his fine clothes and colder-than-steel eyes, was a creature from another world. What could such a man possibly want with her? The question hung between them, more frightening than any insult the crowd had hurled. He didn't speak to her. He simply extended a hand, palm up. It was not a gesture of command, but an invitation. It was clean, uncalloused, a gentleman's hand. After a long, agonizing moment where she seemed to weigh every terrible possibility, she placed her small, work-roughened hand into his. He folded his fingers around hers gently and helped her down from the wagon bed. She was still clutching the sketchbook, so tightly it seemed fused to her body. He led her away without a backward glance. The scornful looks followed them, a palpable wave of judgment and prurient curiosity. The women of the town peered from behind faded curtains, their faces pinched with disapproval. The men just stared, their minds calculating and recalculating the meaning of $1,000 woman. For Alistair, their opinions were less than meaningless. They were insects buzzing outside the window of a speeding train. His private rail car sat on a siding at the edge of town, a gleaming behemoth of polished mahogany and brass that was as out of place as a royal palace in a pigsty. Thomas opened the door, and Alistair guided Alara up the steps. The moment she stepped inside, the world changed. The oppressive heat and dust of Redemption Creek vanished, replaced by the cool, quiet air of a sealed sanctuary. The interior was a marvel of restrained luxury, plush velvet seating, gleaming wood paneling, the scent of leather and old books. A silver tea service sat polished on a small table. It was a world of impossible, breathtaking order. For Alara, who had known only rough-hewn cabins and the filth of her journey, it was as disorienting as stepping onto another planet. She stood just inside the door, looking lost and small, a smudge of prairie dust in a pristine world. Alistair watched her take it all in, her fear warring with a flicker of awe. He saw the way her artist's eyes scanned the details, the grain of the wood, the intricate pattern of the upholstery. He gestured to a cushioned bench. "Please, seat. You must be exhausted." His voice was low and even, betraying no emotion. It was the voice he used to negotiate land rights and sway investors. To Alara, it was terrifyingly neutral. She perched on the very edge of the seat, her back ramrod straight, her sketchbook still a bastion against her stomach. Thomas appeared with a tray. It held a glass of cool water and a plate with a small sandwich, its crust neatly trimmed and a piece of fruit. Such simple fare, yet it seemed to Alara a feast of kings. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, subsisting on scraps and the bitter bread of charity. Her hunger was a sharp, physical pain, but her pride and fear were stronger. She stared at the plate, unmoving. Alistair dismissed Thomas with a nod and sat opposite her, leaving a respectable distance between them. He said nothing for a long time, allowing the silence to settle, for the rhythmic, gentle rocking of the stationary car to soothe the jagged edges of her panic. He was a man who understood leverage, and he knew that, in this moment, she had none. Any move he made, Any word he spoke would be interpreted through the lens of her horrific experience. His internal world was a ledger of calculated risks and returns. Yet this action felt different. It was an impulse, a line item with no discernible profit. He looked at her, this slip of a girl with eyes that held the wisdom of ancient tragedies, and felt a stirring of something he hadn't accounted for. It wasn't pity. It was a deep, resonant offense at the universe's wastefulness. To take a soul that could create such beauty and try to grind it into dust, it was an inefficient, ugly business. His mother, a gentle woman who had painted watercolors in a world that demanded she be only a wife and hostess, would have understood. He saw a reflection of her quiet defiance in the way Alara held her sketchbook. Finally, he spoke. "My name is Alistair Finch." He paused. "You are safe here. I will not harm you." She looked at him, her eyes searching his for the lie. She found none, only a weary sort of gravity. Her throat was tight, but she forced a single, raspy word out. "Why?" It was the question of the hour. The question the whole town was asking. The question that echoed in the luxurious quiet of the rail car. Alistair leaned forward slightly, his gaze dropping to the leather-bound book in her lap. "Because of that," he said, his voice softening for the first time, "because a world that tries to sell a person for parts and labor does not deserve to possess the artist who drew the Mariposa lily." Her gasp was barely audible. He had seen. In that fleeting, windswept moment, he had truly seen. Her fingers tightened on the book, a reflexive, protective motion. But for the first time since stepping onto that wagon bed, a single, tiny, impossibly fragile seed of hope began to push its way through the barren soil of her despair. The quiet of their new arrangement was broken by a sudden, angry pounding on the rail car door. Thomas, ever stoic, opened it a crack to reveal the florid, furious face of Silas Croft. "I want a word with Mr. Finch," he bellowed, trying to shoulder his way past. "There's been a misunderstanding of value." Alistair rose, his placid demeanor evaporating like water on a hot skillet. A chill entered the car, far colder than the ambient air. He moved to the doorway, blocking Croft's view of Alara. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Croft," Alistair said, his voice lethally calm. "Our transaction is complete. You have your money. Now you will remove yourself from my property." "Your property?" Croft sneered, emboldened by greed. He'd heard whispers of the Finch Railroad fortune since the sale, and his $1,000 now felt like a pittance. "I sold you damaged goods for a premium, Finch. That item in there, she's worth more to a man like you. I demand a renegotiation." Alistair didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned in, and the full weight of his power seemed to coalesce in his quiet words. "You have a piece of paper, Mr. Croft, that declares you sold a human being. In more civilized parts of this country, that is not a bill of sale. It is a confession. If I hear one more word from you, I will take that confession to the territorial governor, and I will personally finance the legal proceedings that will see you lose your land, your name, and your freedom. Am I understood?" The color drained from Silas Croft's face. He was a big fish in the small, muddy puddle of Redemption Creek, but he knew he was staring into the cold, predatory eyes of a shark. He stammered, sputtered, and then, with a final, hateful glare, scrambled back down the steps and disappeared into the dust. Alistair closed the door, the solid click of the latch sounding like a final verdict. He turned back to Alara. She was on her feet, her eyes fixed on him. The fear was still there, but now it was mingled with something else, a dawning, shocked respect. She had only ever known men who used their power to crush. She had just witnessed a man use his to shield. He returned to his seat, the cold mask of the Tycoon settling back over his features, but she had seen the fire beneath it. "Now," he said, his voice once again calm and measured, "the engine is being prepared. We leave within the hour. I am traveling to San Francisco on business. I can offer you safe passage that far. From there, you'll be free to make your own way." He paused, his eyes again finding the sketchbook. "All I ask in return is that you permit me to see your work." It was not a demand. It was a request, phrased with a formality that was both baffling and deeply respectful. He was not her owner. He was a patron, a protector, a puzzle she could not begin to solve. Hesitantly, as if offering up her own soul for inspection, she untied the worn leather thong that held the book closed. She didn't hand it to him. Instead, she opened it on her own lap to the first page. It was a charcoal sketch of a steamship's boiler room, a place of oppressive heat and human toil she must have witnessed on her journey west. The play of shadow and light, the strain on the men's faces, the sheer power of the machinery. It was all captured with a raw, visceral energy. She turned the page. A portrait of a sleeping child, impossibly tender. Page after page, the world unfolded through her eyes. There were architectural details of buildings in St. Louis, the vast, empty loneliness of the plains, character studies of fellow passengers on her westbound train, their hopes and anxieties etched into their faces. And the nature studies, like the Mariposa lily, were exquisite, each one a testament to a deep, patient observation of the world. Her art was her language, her diary, her memory. It told the story of her journey far more eloquently than words ever could. Alistair watched, silent and intent. He saw not just talent, but genius. An untutored, raw, and powerful ability to see the truth of a thing and lay it bare on the page. He was a man who built things, empires of steel and wood. She was a woman who captured things, empires of light and shadow. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, his voice hushed with genuine reverence. "My father," she whispered, her voice thick. "He was a cartographer for the army. He taught me to see the lines of things." The engine hissed to life outside, a great metallic sigh. The car gave a gentle lurch, the first movement on a long journey away from Redemption Creek. The town, with its cruelty and judgment, began to slide past the window. Alara didn't watch it go. She was watching the man opposite her, the man who was looking at her drawings, as if they were the most important documents in the world. For the first time, she felt the iron band of fear around her chest loosen, just a fraction. The days that followed settled into a strange, quiet rhythm, governed by the relentless clatter of the wheels on the track. The rail car was their entire world, a moving island of civilization cutting a path through the raw, untamed wilderness of the West. Outside the polished windows, the landscape shifted from the dusty browns of the basin to the rugged grandeur of rising mountains, a panorama of creation that scrolled past them hour by hour. Inside, a delicate, unspoken treaty was drawn. Alistair would spend most of the day at his large, fold-out desk, immersed in a sea of maps, schedules, and telegraphs. He was carving an empire out of the continent, and the task required his absolute focus. He worked with a silent, ferocious intensity that Alara found both intimidating and fascinating. She saw the immense weight he carried, the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes that were invisible when he wore his public mask of command. Alara, in turn, claimed the velvet bench by the wide window as her territory. After the first few days of cautious observation, she had taken Alistair at his word. She drew constantly, as if making up for lost time, as if pouring all her fear and uncertainty onto the page would leave less of it inside her. She sketched the changing light on the distant mesas, the gnarled shapes of juniper trees, the fleeting image of a hawk circling in the vast sky. Her sketchbook, once a shield, was becoming a bridge. Their interactions were sparse, marked by a formal courtesy. He would ensure she had her meals, that the temperature in the car was comfortable. She would offer him a cup of tea when he looked particularly weary. They rarely spoke of what had happened in Redemption Creek. It was a shared trauma that lay beneath the surface of their quiet cohabitation, too raw to be touched directly. Yet, in the silence, a different kind of communication began to flourish. He would look up from his papers and find her utterly lost in her work, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek, her brow furrowed in concentration, and a feeling of profound peace would settle over him. It was the peace of watching a broken thing begin to mend itself. He started leaving things for her, a book on Italian art he'd had in his small library, a tin of finer charcoal pencils he'd instructed Thomas to purchase at a supply stop in Cheyenne. He never mentioned the gifts. They would simply appear on the table beside her. She, in turn, began to see the man behind the Tycoon. She noticed the way he rubbed the back of his neck when a telegraph brought bad news. She saw the quiet satisfaction on his face when he finally solved a complex engineering problem on one of his maps. She saw his loneliness, a vast, empty space that even his empire of steel could not fill. One afternoon, while he was dozing in his chair, exhausted from a night spent working, she dared to sketch him. She didn't draw the powerful industrialist. She drew the tired man, his features softened in sleep, the guardrails of his authority momentarily lowered. She captured the profound weariness and the flicker of a dreamer in the lines of his face. She hid the drawing in the back of her book, feeling as though she had stolen something precious and intimate. The first crack in their fragile peace came at a station in a bustling Wyoming town. While the train was taking on water and coal, Thomas returned for the telegraph office with a grim expression, a yellow dispatch in his hand. Alistair read it, and Alara saw that cold, dangerous stillness settle over him again. "What is it?" she asked, her voice small. He hesitated, as if debating whether to shield her from it. Then he seemed to make a decision. He placed the telegraph on the table between them. "It appears Mr. Croft is more tenacious than I credited him for." She picked it up with trembling fingers. It was from one of Alistair's business associates in Denver. It spoke of a rumor spreading like wildfire along the telegraph lines, originating from Redemption Creek. The story had been twisted into a lurid tale of a decadent railroad baron, Finch, who had purchased a pregnant harlot for his own perverse amusement. Croft was painting himself as a pious man who had been swindled and his son's honor besmirched. The words struck Alara like a physical blow. The shame she had been holding at bay came rushing back, hot and suffocating. She was not just a burden, she was a liability, a scandal that could tarnish this good man's name. "He's telling everyone," she whispered, the paper shaking in her hand. "He's ruining you." "He is an insect, Alara," Alistair said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "And I'm not a man who is bothered by insects." But she could see it was more than that. The rumor was a poison, and it was spreading. She saw it in the way he stared out the window, his jaw clenched. This was not a problem he could solve with money or threats alone. This was an attack on his character, a weapon far more insidious than Croft's initial greed. The incident cast a pall over the next leg of their journey. A new tension entered the car. Alara withdrew into herself, the flow of her drawings slowing to a trickle. She felt like a contagion, a walking disgrace that would inevitably infect and destroy the first person who had shown her true decency. The sketchbook felt heavy in her lap now, a reminder of the art that had drawn him to her, and, in doing so, had entangled him in her sordid fate. Her own body was a constant, growing reminder of her situation. The life within her was becoming more pronounced, a gentle but insistent presence. One evening, a wave of dizziness and nausea swept over her, a common complaint of her condition, but terrifying in its intensity. She swayed on her feet, the luxurious car spinning around her. Alistair was across the car in an instant, his hands steadying her shoulders. "Alara." The alarm in his voice was unmistakable. He helped her to the bench, his touch gentle but firm. He pressed a cool cloth to her forehead and had Thomas fetch her a glass of water with a bit of sugar. The Tycoon, the builder of railroads, was suddenly a caretaker, his movements surprisingly deft and certain. He didn't hover, but he didn't leave her side until the spell had passed and the color had returned to her cheeks. "Thank you," she murmured, mortified by her own weakness. "It is nothing," he said, but his eyes held a new, fierce protectiveness. It was no longer the abstract principle of saving an artist. It was the concrete, immediate reality of the woman before him, vulnerable and carrying a child. He felt a surge of anger so potent it surprised him. Anger at Croft, at the world, at the circumstances that had left her so utterly alone. In that moment, he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he would not be abandoning her in San Francisco. The thought of her facing the world alone, in her condition, was now unbearable. The line item in his internal ledger had changed. The potential for loss, for losing her, was now a risk he was unwilling to take. The final blow to their tentative peace came in the form of a folded newspaper that Thomas discreetly left on Alastair's desk. It was the Denver Tribune. On an inside page, a small but venomous article detailed the scandal of Redemption Creek. It repeated Croft's slanders, embellished with journalistic flourish, painting Alastair as a depraved aristocrat and Alara as a fallen woman of the lowest order. It questioned Finch's judgment and moral character, subtly suggesting that a man of such proclivities might not be fit to oversee a project of national importance like the Transcontinental Railroad. Alara saw him read it. She saw the muscle jump in his jaw, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped the paper. He folded it deliberately and placed it aside, his face an unreadable mask. But later that night, she saw him through the slightly ajar door of his private compartment, standing by the window, staring out at the dark, rushing landscape. He looked utterly alone, a king isolated in his moving castle, besieged by whispers. The weight of it all became too much for her to bear. She was poisoned. A beautiful, gilded cage could not change that. She was ruining him. The thought solidified into a hard, painful resolve. She could not allow it. The only gift she could give him in return for his kindness was to disappear. At a small, remote water stop in the desolate heart of the Nevada desert, under the cold, indifferent light of 1,000 stars, she made her move. While the crew was busy with the engine, she slipped on her worn cloak, took her sketchbook, and crept to the door of the rail car. The air outside was sharp and cold. The vast, silent desert seemed to be waiting to swallow her whole. It was terrifying, but it was better than destroying the one man who had shown her a world beyond cruelty. She took a deep breath and stepped down onto the rough gravel of the platform. Freedom, and a future of absolute uncertainty, was just a few steps away. "And where do you think you're going?" The voice came from the shadows of the car, low and resonant with a dangerous quiet. Alastair stepped into the faint moonlight spilling from the car door. He was not wearing his coat, and in his shirt sleeves, he looked less like a tycoon and more like a man who had been woken from a nightmare. I cannot stay," Alara stammered, clutching her sketchbook. "I am bringing you ruin. That newspaper, the telegrams. I will not be the cause of your downfall." "My downfall?" He took a step closer, his eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It was something more raw, more wounded. "Do you have such a low opinion of me? That the whispers of a contemptible worm like Croft could bring me to ruin? It is not just him. It is the world," she cried, her voice breaking. "They will not understand. They will twist your kindness into something ugly. I will not let you pay the price for my life. The price is mine to determine, not yours," he said, his voice dropping, becoming thick with an intensity that rooted her to the spot. "I have spent my life acquiring things, Alara. Land, steel, influence, wealth. It is a cold and empty inventory. Not a single item on that list has brought me a moment of peace. This," he gestured to the quiet car behind them, to the fragile world they had built. "Watching you work, watching you find your way back from the edge, that has been the only worthwhile thing I've done in a decade." Tears were streaming down her face now, silent and hot. She didn't know what to say, how to respond to such a staggering confession. In a gesture of desperation, of trying to make him understand, she fumbled with her sketchbook, opening it to the back. Her hand shaking, she held out the portrait she had drawn of him sleeping. "This is how I see you," she whispered. "Not as a tycoon, as a good man, burdened by the world. I cannot bear to add to that burden." He took the sketchbook from her. His gaze fell upon the portrait, and for a long moment, he was utterly still. He looked at the drawing, then back at her face, illuminated by the moonlight. He saw her not as a victim, not as a project, but as the artist who had seen past his fortune and his power to the core of him. He saw her strength, her impossible resilience, her beautiful, wounded heart, and he knew, with the force of a landslide, that he was in love with her. The pragmatic, calculated world of Alastair Finch fractured and fell away, leaving only this one undeniable truth. He gently closed the book and set it on the platform step. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking away her tears. "Your burden is my own now, Ilara. If you will let it be." His voice was raw with vulnerability. "The world can say what it will. Its opinion is meaningless to me. But your opinion of me, is the only one that matters. Do not leave. Do not disappear into the desert and leave me with nothing but my cold inventory." He paused, his eyes searching hers, laying his soul bare in the desert night. "Marry me, not as a transaction, not for protection. Marry me as my wife. We will face them down together. Your child will be my child. We will give him my name, and they will not dare to touch you, or him, ever again." It was not a proposal born of pity or duty. It was a plea, a declaration, a desperate gamble for a future he hadn't known he wanted until this very moment. In the vast silence of the American wilderness, surrounded by nothing but the stars and the steel rails that were his life's work, he was offering her the one thing he had never offered anyone: himself. And Ilara, looking into the eyes of the man who had bought her, saved her, and now loved her, felt the last of her fear wash away, replaced by the terrifying, exhilarating dawn of a new beginning. Their arrival in Sacramento was not the quiet, discreet affair Alastair might have once preferred. He was a man who understood that the best defense was a swift and decisive offense. Hiding Ilara away would only fuel the rumors, confirming the slander peddled by Silas Croft. Alastair chose a different strategy, a direct confrontation on his own terms. He sent a series of telegraphs, not to his lawyers, but to the very men Croft had sought to poison against him: influential city fathers, banking partners, and the powerful publisher of the Sacramento Union. He requested their presence for a private meeting at the prestigious Leland Hotel, citing a matter of both personal honor and business integrity. They walked into the hotel's grandest parlor, a room of dark wood, red velvet, and soaring ceilings. Alastair was the image of calm authority in a perfectly tailored suit. At his side, Ilara was no longer the frightened girl from the auction block. She wore a simple but elegant dress of deep blue that Thomas had procured for her, her pregnancy now a gentle, undeniable curve. Her hair was neatly pinned, and though her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, she held her head high. Her sketchbook was not with her. She had left it in their suite like a promise she would return to. Today, she would face the world with nothing but her own quiet strength. The men were already gathered, a coterie of wealth and power, their faces a mixture of curiosity and stern judgment. And in the corner, looking smug and vindictive, were Silas and Jedediah Croft. Silas had clearly been preening, spinning his tale of woe to a captive audience. He straightened up as Alastair and Ilara entered, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Gentlemen," Alastair began, his voice carrying easily in the silent room, "thank you for coming. I have called you here to address a malicious rumor, and to introduce you to my fiancée, Miss Ilara Gable." A ripple of shock went through the room. Fiancée was not a word any of them had expected. Silas Croft's face contorted in fury. "Fiancée," he spat, stepping forward. "This is an outrage. This man, this Tycoon, he stole my son's intended. He purchased this soiled woman, this harlot carrying another man's bastard, and now he tries to pass her off as a lady." Jedediah, a weak-chinned echo of his father, nodded vigorously. "She's a liar and a tramp. She deceived us." Alastair listened to the venomous outburst with an unnerving placidity. When Croft had finally sputtered to a halt, Alastair turned to the assembled men. "Mr. Croft speaks of deception," he said, his tone dangerously mild. "He speaks of transactions. It is true. A transaction did take place." From his coat pocket, he produced a folded piece of paper and held it up. It was the bill of sale from Redemption Creek. "This is a document Mr. Croft himself wrote. It details the sale of one human being for a price. He refers to this woman, my fiancée, As chattel, he orchestrated and profited from an event so barbaric I hesitate to describe it to civilized men, a human auction. He let the words hang in the air. The expressions on the faces of the city fathers began to shift from judgment to discomfort. "This man speaks of my fiancée's honor," Alistair continued, his voice gaining a hard, steel edge. "Let me tell you of the honor of Silas Croft. He would sell a pregnant, widowed woman into servitude to recoup the cost of a train ticket. That is the sum of his character." "Lies!" Silas roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "She is worthless. Her and her pathetic scribbles." It was the opening Alistair had been waiting for. He hadn't brought the sketchbook, but he had come prepared. He turned to Thomas, who was standing discreetly by the door. At Alistair's nod, Thomas stepped forward and unrolled a large canvas portfolio on the central mahogany table. Inside were not business papers, but a dozen of Alara's drawings, carefully removed from her book. Alistair had chosen them with meticulous care. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was not tense, it was captivated. The drawings were laid out like jewels on dark velvet. There was the portrait of the sleeping child, so tender it ached. There was a stunning, panoramic view of the Sierra Nevada mountains, their granite peaks seeming to cleave the very air. There was a series of portraits of the railroad workers Alistair employed, Irishmen, Chinese laborers, freedmen, each face a map of hardship and resilience, captured with an empathy that was almost holy. These were men the bankers and officials saw only as entries on a balance sheet, as labor costs. Alara had seen their souls. Mr. Harrison, the formidable publisher of the Sacramento Union, a man not easily impressed, leaned forward, peering at a detailed drawing of a steam locomotive's complex machinery. "My word," he breathed, "the draftsmanship is extraordinary." This was Alara's moment. All eyes turned to her. She was terrified, but she felt Alistair's presence beside her, a warm and solid anchor. She thought of the child beneath her heart, a future that deserved to be born into dignity, not shame. She found her voice. It was not loud, but it was clear and steady. She did not speak of her own ordeal. She did not defend her honor. She pointed to the portrait of a grizzled, one-eyed railroad worker. "His name is Finn," she said softly. "He lost his eye in a blasting accident. He told me he sends every dollar he makes back to his sister in Cork. He said the mountains here remind him of home, only bigger." She then gestured to a drawing of a small, resilient flower growing from a crack in a rock. "That is a sky pilot. It only grows above the timberline." Finn said it was God's reminder that beauty can grow in the harshest of places. Her simple, direct testimony was more powerful than any denial or accusation. She did not need to prove her worth. Her art and her words did it for her. She had taken the ugliness of the world and transformed it, not by ignoring it, but by seeing the humanity and beauty tucked within it. In that moment, she was not a victim. She was an artist, a storyteller, a woman of immense grace. The tide in the room had turned completely. The businessmen were looking at the Crofts with open contempt. Silas and Jedediah seemed to shrink, their blustering rage deflating into pathetic, sputtering irrelevance. They were exposed not just as cruel, but as blind. They had possessed a diamond and had tried to sell it as a piece of coal. Alistair delivered the final, decisive blow. He placed his hand gently on Alara's back. "Miss Gable has honored me by accepting my proposal of marriage. We will be wed here in Sacramento, and my heir will be born here. Her past is a story of survival against the cruelty of men like these. Her future is as my wife, and as one of the finest artists this country will ever see. Any attack on her character is an attack on mine, and I assure you, gentlemen, I will defend my honor and my family with every resource at my command." The message was unequivocal. Mr. Harrison, the publisher, looked from the drawings to Alara's composed face, then to Alistair's resolute one. A slow smile spread across his face. He saw not a scandal, but a story, a powerful, human story of art, love, and redemption. He looked at Silas Croft with disdain. "Croft," he said, his voice dripping with dismissal, "I believe your business here is concluded." Shamed, defeated, and utterly stripped of their power, Silas and Jedediah Croft scurried from the room, their retreat as undignified as their attack. The cloud of their malice lifted, leaving behind only the quiet power of Alara's art and the unshakable bond between the two people at the center of the room. Their trial by fire was over. They had faced the world together and won. Back in the quiet sanctuary of their hotel suite, the immense tension of the last few hours finally broke. The grand performance was over. The audience was gone. It was just the two of them. Alistair closed the door, and the sounds of the city faded away, leaving a profound and welcome silence. Alara sank onto a velvet settee, the strength that had held her upright in the parlor suddenly deserting her. She felt boneless with relief. Alistair crossed the room and sat beside her, not close enough to crowd her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth and solidity of his presence. He didn't speak, simply shared the quiet with her, allowing her the space to breathe. Outside the tall windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Sacramento. After a long moment, she turned to him, her eyes luminous with unshed tears of gratitude. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You saw me, down in that dusty street, when I was nothing more than an object for sale. You saw me." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. His touch was warm and certain. He looked from their joined hands to her face, his expression stripped of all its usual guards, leaving only a deep and abiding tenderness. "I saw the truth, Alara," he replied, his voice low and earnest. Croft and his kind, they see the world only in terms of profit and loss, of assets and defects. You see what is real. You see the soul of things. I think, perhaps, I was the one who was blind before I saw your work." A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. He gently wiped it away with his thumb. There was no need for grand declarations or flowery promises. Everything that needed to be said had been proven in the crucible of the past hour, in the long, quiet days on the train, in a single, impulsive bid at a dusty auction. Their bond had been forged not in romance, but in mutual respect, and had blossomed into a love that was as strong and resilient as the steel of his railroads. Later, as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and rose, they stood on the small balcony of their suite, looking out over the burgeoning city. The air was cool and carried the scent of wood smoke and progress. Alistair's arm was settled lightly around her shoulders, a gesture of easy, protective intimacy. He held a map in his other hand, a chart of the future he was building, but his attention wasn't on the lines of ink. It was on the woman beside him. Alara was not looking at the city. In her hands was her sketchbook, open to a fresh, clean page. A charcoal pencil was poised in her fingers. She was humming a soft, tuneless melody, a sound of pure contentment. Her gaze was fixed on the distant horizon, where the sun had set, the direction the rails would one day run. The child within her was safe, a gentle stirring beneath her heart. Her past was a ghost, its power to haunt her broken. Her future was no longer a bill of sale, dictated by the cruelty of others. It was a blank page, and for the first time in her life, she was the one holding the pencil. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. Her true worth was finally seen. What does true value in a person mean to you? Tell us below.